Hey, welcome to Energy Chat. So, I had a comment on one of my YouTube videos, which I very much appreciate. Please leave comments if you feel like it. And the comment was around someone who's done their own domestic batteries and solar for their house. And they explained the costs of the system to me and what they see as the payback, and also their plans to go fully off-grid in the future. I thought it was a really interesting thing that they'd been able to do, and I think that lots of people want to do this sort of thing because they see it as a way to reduce their bills. I think that obviously it is a way to reduce your bill if you can buy it for the cost and install it for the cost that he says. And I personally advocate that if you can look at the costs of installing, buying the system, putting it on your house, and you think that it will financially benefit you, then you should do it, because I believe that the only way that we do a system change properly is if people do what is in their interests and not some sort of moral stand for what they think should be happening. I just want to talk about what in your interests really means. So there's some element of risk there in that you expect the payback period to be a certain amount based on today's bills, and you also take a risk that for that payback period you'll be employed, you'll have your house, and that nothing really will change in that payback period. Those could all be very, very good assumptions, I want to point out. So again, I would say take agency. If you want to reduce your carbon footprint and you think that buying some solar panels and a battery will help you do that, then I think you should definitely do that. The points that I try to make in the videos are twofold. One is about, again, making sure that people do what's in their interests, so that we actually get feedback on the kinds of policies and subsidies that are given by the government. The second one is more important. I think it's that I want to change how the entire policy framework is operating right now, because I believe although those parties that can invest in their own domestic solar and batteries do so at a benefit to themselves, they actually, for the overall system and the country, I think it is a detriment to others. I personally work as a power trader in physical power trading, which is dispatching assets, which happen to be large batteries, into the national grid. Before that, I've worked in wind energy research and wind energy financing, so long-term energy deals with renewables, and also how to make sure that renewable assets maintain their value, and also looking into especially grid resilience and stopping blackouts, which is the main purpose of the grid, which is to serve electricity. The country's backbone is the electricity grid. Almost all services rely on it, including those services to do with pumping of gas and distribution of other kinds of fuels. So if the electricity grid goes down, we have got quite resilient plans to get it back up, but it is a big inconvenience, and unfortunately people may die. The national grid today is extremely resilient. It's designed to handle the worst supply crisis in like 50 years. And if you were to do the same level of resiliency in your own house, you'd potentially need around 10 or 15 days worth of energy storage for your house. And that could significantly increase the payback period that you've calculated to get the equivalent level of resiliency. Now, if you only go partially off-grid, when you actually do need the grid, which may be a couple of months every year or even just a couple of weeks every year, you're actually using the grid at the most stressful time, and the grid cost is designed around those specific weeks when everyone needs it because it's not sunny and not windy, and the cost is amortized, that means spread out across the entire year in your energy bill. So if you're not paying the energy bill for most of the year, you obviously pay the standing charge, but if you're not paying the energy bill for most of the year, it means that you're not actually contributing to the costs of the system, which is those peak times. Now, the fact that if lots of people start to go off-grid, what they're going to do is they're going to change the way that the standing charge works. So basically, they're just going to increase the standing charge because everyone has to pay that if you're somewhat on-grid. And the only way to get away from paying the standing charge will be to be completely off-grid and basically disconnect your house from the network. Now, to do that, as I said, would maybe cost 15, even maybe 20 years worth of energy bills to become, and it might take that amount of time to pay back. It becomes a big risk now where you say, okay, well, I've got to commit to 20 years being off grid and then forever being off grid in order to save money, essentially. And so the more people go partially off grid, the higher they're going to have to make the standing charge to recoup the costs of maintaining the network from everyone. Now, they could do things where they make the standing charge higher at system stress events, like so in those dark months of the winter, like we're in right now, maybe your renewable system with your storage isn't generating much electricity. That's when the standing charge could get really high, in the same way that we've got flexible energy prices in some domestic deals. Now, in that situation, the benefits of going off-grid would be much less, because in those times when you do need the network, you are paying those high standing charges. Now, on the back of all of this is actually what people think of as convenience, and whether they actually mind having no electricity. And this is a really important thing, because you can be 98% self-sufficient, but that 2% could represent a week of the year, and that week could be that you don't have any energy. Now, what are you going to do in that week? Maybe you could schedule to go on holiday, but then everyone needs to go on holiday then, so the prices would be very high. You could switch to a different fuel type, but if you've really gone in on this net zero thing, then your whole house is probably running off electricity. If you own a house, you may or have a fireplace, but then you've got to look at whether burning a fire continuously for a week in your house is offsetting that carbon savings that you're personally doing by having your electricity from renewable sources in your house. So there's all these ways that we basically don't price in the very last part of resiliency, which is the most expensive. And that's the difference between, you can be 90% off grid and the cost can be like 3 years payback in terms of today's bills. But if you go to 100%, it could be 15, 20 years payback. And that really is a situation across all industries, and especially in stuff like data centers, which I've been talking about recently. Whereas a data center, you need 99.999% resiliency, and that means that you need two kinds of fuel-based power plants to provide that. You need maybe gas and then a diesel backup. So when people say we can run it with renewables, you're not going to build it with renewables. You might have renewables later on, but to actually get it built and permitted, you're going to need to have fuel, because fuel is storable energy, and that's the most resilient form of energy. What I'm trying to say is that off-grid adoption shifts the financial burden from those who can go off-grid onto those who can't go off-grid. And given the scale of the challenge, we need to treble the size of the grid. Why would we be incentivizing less people to be paying into that? Now, I'm not trying to say that energy bills have to be high. I think that's one of the worst situations that we can have for quality of life and also for industry and jobs in the country. What I am saying is that most of the bill that's to do with infrastructure and also to do with country resilience and like strategic resilience of the country's economy should be paid for through taxation, where it's essentially impossible to dodge and you're not getting people incentivized to do their own thing. Obviously, taxation is a bit of a loophole for the ultra wealthy, but for most of us, it's progressive and we all pay in. If you pay for energy upgrades through the bill, it pushes people towards off-grid solutions, which is unintentional and leads to these situations where the poorest people have to pick up the burden for the next level of poorest people who have potentially gone off-grid to save themselves some money, while the richest people don't really mind either way. So if we pay through taxes, we'll be able to keep bills cheap and preserve fairness, which I think is the most important thing, and actually fund infrastructure which helps everyone from rich to poor, but most specifically helps the poorest first. This idea that we should go off-grid is a symptom of governments shifting the investment risk to citizens because they've got no money themselves, and it's very analogous to the selling of council homes to raise money for governments, and those sorts of moves where you sell off, schools and things like that the government or councils used to own just to raise some cash. A similar idea in infrastructure where governments are saying, well, we can't invest in the grid upgrades at the scale that we need, so we're going to basically incentivize people to invest in their own kinds of infrastructure, which kind of half does the job.